achievements of Maulana Muhammad Ali in 50 years of work. This 1950 to 51 is the period in which he worked. He was born in 1874, which now seems a long time ago. And when he started his education in the 1890s, he did brilliantly in his studies, and he acquired the degrees in Lahore of MA in English and LLB in law by the year 1899. And in those days, India was under British rule. And in these colleges of higher learning, many of the teachers and lecturers were from Great Britain or other Europeans. And remember, that is the time when if someone had just attended primary school and left school, he was considered very educated. And if someone had done the equivalent of GCSEs and then left school, they were considered as very highly educated and maybe 1 in 1,000. So you can see what a person would be who had a MA in English and LLB then. Those were the days when Muslims were facing a great turmoil because Islam was under heavy attack from many quarters, from Christian missionaries who'd gone to Muslim countries from England, Holland, Germany, USA. There were certain Hindu movements at that time attacking Islam, and they've reappeared in the last few years. This Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, his backers belong to certain Hindu movements which arose in the time of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib. Arya Samaj was the main one, anti-Muslim movements, and they've reappeared now in the last few years under Mr. Modi. And Islam was also under attack at that time by modern non-religious Western philosophies, which were appearing at the time due to developments in science. And of course, now they've completely overtaken the Christian religion, so that where there was Christianity in the West, that's been largely replaced by non-religious Western philosophies. And Islam was under heavy attack from all of those. And the very survival of Islam as a living religion was being questioned by many Muslims. Can Islam survive in the future? But just in those days, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad had founded the Ahmadiyya movement for 2 purposes. One was to defend Islam, which is understandable in the light of the situation. But amazingly, he wanted to show why the modern world actually needs its teachings. And Maulana Muhammad Ali, aged 23 in 1897, went with some friends to meet Hazrat Mirza Sahib where he lived in Qadian. And he was very impressed by, when he stayed there for about a week or so, by the things which Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib said and discussed. So what Maulana Muhammad Ali found was that while people outside were discussing, can Islam survive? Can Islam survive? Both Muslims and non-Muslims. Hazrat Mirza Sahib was saying, Islam will conquer the hearts of its opponents and doubters. So at the appeal of Hazrat Mirza Sahib, Maulana Muhammad Ali, who was going to start his legal career after doing his LLB, start a legal career, he gave that up and he devoted his life to the service of Islam under the guidance of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib. And of course, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib himself died only a few years later in 1908. And Maulana Muhammad Ali wrote near the end of his life, 50 years after he'd been doing this work. He not only wrote this, but I think he said it in a speech. He says, "It is my firm conviction, which I acquired from that holy man from whose company I benefited for a long time," that is Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, "that if we show the world the real picture of the truth of Islam, the truth of the Holy Prophet, truth of the Quran, then undoubtedly people will bow their heads before it. Today we possess that picture." We possess that picture. Why? Because Maulana Muhammad Ali, as I will show, produced literature, a lot of it in English, even more in Urdu, with that picture. He says there is only the question of propagating it. So if we look at the life of Maulana Muhammad Ali, who died in 1951, October, what he achieved was this. He created comprehensive, unique literature on Islam, relevant for the modern age. And it's an invaluable source of knowledge and spiritual training. It's a powerful missionary tool for spreading Islam. And I said this literature even proved a financial asset for the Jamaat because people bought it, although now generally it's available free. And his literature, which there's the English translation of the Holy Quran with that lengthy commentary. There is this big book, The Religion of Islam, which tells you all about what Islam is. This literature clarified a lot of misunderstood issues relating to the basics of Islam, such as, for example, what exactly is jihad? What is the position of women in Islam? And is Islam only about saying prayers in a mechanical, ritual way? Or is there any heart to it as well, any spirit? And he didn't only write books, but he organized a community, which we are part of, to carry forward the Islamic reform work of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. So these are the Lahore MDs, this community organized. And he himself became internationally recognized by Muslims and non-Muslims as an authority on Islam. In his lifetime, Maulana Muhammad Ali was recognized internationally by Muslim and non-Muslim scholars. And people wrote to him when they had questions about Islam, not just ordinary people, but Muslim leaders. And he made the name and the Anjuman-e-Ishaat Islam Lahore world famous. Its literature reached remote corners of the world. And he himself attained recognition from Muslim leaders. They said he and his community, his Jamaat, are doing important Islamic work. And he, Maulana Muhammad Ali, was personally known to, he was a personal friend of Muslim statesmen in British India and then later Pakistan, the religious leaders of the time, intellectuals, writers, high officials, and dignitaries of his time. So he was became well known to them. And another of his achievements was that he clarified what were the real claims of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. He clarified them for both the Ahmadiyya community and for other Muslims. And he explained the true Islamic teaching on who is a Muslim. And he has explained that any person who recites the kalama and says, Islam is my religion, that person is to be treated by us as our Muslim brother. He may be wrong in many ways. He might not be a practicing Muslim. He might be indulging in some practices, Islamic practices in the wrong way. Some beliefs of his may be wrong. But as long as he recites the kalama, he is a member of the Muslim community, and no one can declare him, as people used to do, declare such a person as an unbeliever, a kafir, and expelled from Islam. Of course, it's our duty to guide him and educate him, but such a person cannot be, on the basis that he holds some wrong belief or does some wrong deed, actually excluded from our brotherhood of Islam. And he presented Islam as a religion of tolerance, both towards other faiths, that Islam shows tolerance to other religions, but it teaches tolerance to its followers towards each other as well. So obviously, when I wrote that book, Islam, Peace and Tolerance, things I wrote there, which I expanded on, that was only possible because I'd studied the writings of Maulana Muhammad Ali and other Lahore Ahmadiyya literature. So now I'll quote some statements of Maulana Muhammad Ali. He said, Allah the Most High, by providing me with the opportunity of sitting at the feet of Hazrat Mirza Sahab, enabled me to render this service to Islam, that producing the literature. If we now keep this prepared literature locked up at home, then there is no difference between us and the other Muslims. The real work is to make this literature reach the world. And he then once gave some advice to youngsters of the Jamaat. At the end of his speech, he says, at the end, I want to say something to my young friends. You see, he called members of his community as his friends, even though he's addressing those who are much younger than him. You must keep alive the traditions of the Ahmadiyya community. The Ahmadiyya community Jamaat stands for spreading Islam in the world and taking the Holy Quran to people. Do not let this tradition of yours go into decline. He continues, it is a matter of pride for us that in this age when the Muslims have entirely neglected the propagation of Islam, Allah the Most High has chosen our Jamaat to spread Islam. The task for which Allah had raised such great people in the past has now been given to unworthy and incapable people like us to have the opportunity to carry out. So pray to God for strength to enable you to live up to this standard. He goes on, I will say again to my young friends, and I will say it again and again, keep alive the traditions of your community, adhere to the Islamic code of morals and behavior, read the Quran, listen to it, ponder over it, and act upon it. My young friends, I stress upon you with the greatest emphasis and advise you not to bury your traditions along with burying the bodies of your elders. Keep them alive, keep the traditions alive, and take them forward, lest people say this community is dying away. So this is and then I've omitted that from this talk, but he said in it also that the day will come when you will bury each and every one of your elders with your own hands. And then your descendants will bury each one of you with their hands. But do not let the traditions of your Jamaat be buried, as he says here, along with the bodies of your elders. So I'll now go on to describe, to show you how Maulana Muhammad was described by those who knew him. And all this is given fully, in full detail, in this book, which I showed. And I've only taken out some little snippets of it for the purposes of this talk. And most of these statements were written at that time when Maulana Muhammad died. And I've translated them from Urdu to English. And Dr. Saeed Ahmed Khan Sahib, the father of our present Amir, and who himself was our Amir, and who inaugurated that center in Wembley, he says about Maulana Muhammad Ali, his life at home was informal but highly organized. This is how he managed to do so much work. It seemed as if every moment of his life was devoted to a particular purpose. For every task, there was an appointed time, and every moment was meant for a particular task. And then Maulana Abdullah Vidyarthi, who was my mother's father, he worked closely with Maulana Muhammad Ali. Of course, he was much younger than Maulana Muhammad Ali. And he says that once they were staying in the summer months in a hilly place where people went to during the hot summers in Lahore for cooler weather. And Maulana Abdullah Vidyarthi says that there we were doing proofreading of a book of Maulana Muhammad Ali, along with Maulana Muhammad Ali. He says, when after working all day, we young ones were tired and felt like going for a pleasant walk in the mountains, we would hear him call, "Come and let us read the proofs." So untiring was he that while we young people would give up, he knew not the meaning of fatigue. And then there was his acts of worship, his voluntary prayers, apart from the 5 daily prayers, tahajjud prayers in the middle of the night. And someone has written that at night, when he was in seclusion, he was by himself, he would be falling before God in prayer. Whenever anyone woke in the middle of the night, they would hear a melodious, wonderful sound of heartfelt crying and supplicating. Supplicating was praying before God. And that included glorification, praise, and sanctification of the Almighty. In other words, saying Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. And the person here writes, God alone knows if at that time he was in this world or in another world. So when he was saying his tahajjud prayers, to people it appeared as if he wasn't in this world at all. He was in some other world. And then again, Dr. Saeed Ahmed Khan Sahib has said or written, I never heard him speaking ill of anyone, backbiting, carping is criticizing, being hypocritical or conspiring. If ever there was a mention of his opponents, he took their names with respect and honor, as befits a God-fearing believer of the highest order. And that reminds me that in Maulana Muhammad Ali's days, that was the start of the career of a famous Muslim scholar of Pakistan, most well known, Maulana Sayyid Abul Ala Madudi. He was a young man in those days who just started publishing a magazine. And one of our missionaries, Hafiz Sher Muhammad Sahab, went to see Maulana Madudi and said, what do you think of Maulana Muhammad Ali? And Maulana Maududi said, well, in his literature, there's this bad smell of rationalism. He's turned away from spirituality to rationalism. And Hafiz Saab said to Maulana Maududi, now I will tell you what Maulana Muhammad Ali said about you. I asked Maulana Muhammad Ali the same question, what do you think about Maulana Maududi? And Maulana Muhammad Ali replied, he is also doing good work. That's what he said about you. He is also doing good work. Then another gentleman who worked closely with Maulana Muhammad Ali, Maulana Ahmad Yar, whom Hamad says that he's seen when Maulana Ahmad Yar was old. He used to be General Secretary of our Jamaat in Lahore. And he's written that Maulana Muhammad Ali was an epitome, although people say epitome, but it's actually epitome. In other words, he personified, he was an epitome of humility and modesty. As Secretary of the Anjuman, I had the opportunity to see him very closely. He was not at all in the habit of backbiting or complaining. And another missionary of our movement, Maulana Murtaza Khan, Hassan Khan, says more about Maulana Muhammad Ali. He was very mindful of the duty of visiting sick people. He would sit with them for a long time, inquiring about their well-being and giving them advice about their treatment. During my illness and that of my children, he visited us many times. There was no formality about these visits. Maulana Murtaza Hassan Khan says that it's not that Maulana pre-announced his visit, that I'm a very important person who's coming to see how you are. He would just turn up at any time. And some years after the death of Maulana Muhammad Ali, Maulana Abdullah Vidyarthi had a road accident in Lahore and was hit by a rickshaw. And he spent a little time in hospital and then was recovering at home. And he used to write letters to us. And he wrote a letter to us in which he says that while I was in bed recovering from my injuries, I again and again remembered Maulana Muhammad Ali. If he had been alive, he would have been coming round again and again, and he would have been bringing doctors with him every time to see how I was. So apart from just being a scholar and a writer of books, he also had all these human qualities. And Maulana Ahmad Yar, who of course worked in the office as General Secretary, says he treated the Anjuman office staff like his relatives. If anyone was ill, he would go to visit him. If anyone was in financial difficulty, he would make every effort to bring him relief. He felt sympathetic towards every member of the Jamaat. And then lastly, Maulana Hafiz Sher Muhammad Sahib, with whom I spent quite a long time in South Africa and had chance to have many discussions with him in this country and in Pakistan. He used to say, and I remembered this, of course he said it in Urdu, Maulana Muhammad Ali was a very great man. He would say, use the word great in Urdu, he would say it like this, Maulana Muhammad Ali Sahab, बहुत great आदमी थे, बहुत great आदमी थे. He says, I served under him for 10 years. And not even once did I have any cause to complain about him. And then he used to say, look at this, that 10 years I worked under him and I can't find a single time that I had some complaint about him. So with that, then I end my talk.